Welcome. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Morning, afternoon, evening.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Well, afternoon, evening on your end.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost evening.
Yeah.
Hello.
Welcome. Great to see you all. Thanks so much for joining. So this is webinar 13 of the International Oak Society and Global Conservation Consortium for Oak. I'm Amy Byrne. I'm based at the Morton Arboretum, and at the Morton Arboretum, we lead the GCCO. I'm also on the board of the International Oak Society, and myself and Roderick here, we co-host these webinars with our presenters as well that kindly share their amazing work with all of us in these webinar series. So upcoming for this webinar, we have John Knapp, who will present on the work of oak conservation research within the islands of Channel Islands of California. And then Michael Eason will be talking about oaks of Edwards Plateau today. And this slide here that I'm showing is just, we love to acknowledge the generous support of these institutions, our supporting institutional members and the standard institutional members who make significant contributions to the iOS through that membership. So we would just like to recognize their generous support. But now I think I'll pass it off to Roderick, who will just share some announcements with all of us before we kick it off with the presentations.
Thank you, Amy. Great to see everyone here, and a special welcome to anyone who is not a member and you're joining us for the first time. You're very welcome. And I will share some links in the chat here about events or items I'm going to talk about. The first one is the link to the iOS website, which most people will be familiar with, but perhaps people who are joining us for the first time would like to visit that. News. We've just sent out our latest newsletter, Oak News and Notes. So if you've not seen that, check your inbox. iOS members should be there. Otherwise, I've put the link in the chat where you can see all our newsletters, including the latest one. And there's also, with each newsletter, a lot of new information and new articles and blog posts on the website, so do have a look at those. The journal is being shipped out to those members who request a hard copy if you have a standard membership. It has arrived in several parts of the world. In the US, it is always, it takes a bit longer. The original is shipped from Europe. So if you haven't received it, it should be on its way. And once we think everyone has received it, we will post the PDFs online so electronic members can access the PDFs of the journal there. Upcoming events. You may be aware that we have 2 tours coming up. Soon in September, we'll be in Turkey, where Elif will be guiding us, and it looks like a great tour coming up there. And by the way, there are still 5 days before the registration closes, so check out upcoming events there. We have links to the tours, and if you're not aware of it or you're still considering it, you have till the 31st to register for that. And then in October, we'll have our tour of Southeast USA, focusing on Georgia and Alabama, with brief excursions into South Carolina and Florida as well. That will be led by Ron Lance and Patrick Thompson. I think Ron is on this call too. Check the links in the upcoming events. There is still space and still time, also till the end of this month, to register. So I do recommend those events if you have the time available. I think that's all I have for announcements. If you have any general questions about the iOS or any of these things I've announced, we definitely will field those questions at the end after the presentations. I think that's, one thing, yes. This is a sneak preview because we haven't launched it yet, but we are going to be launching a site where you can buy iOS merchandise, and we are just starting to order these. And there is Amy. If you can see Amy, she's showing some of the events, some of the items. We have caps with the iOS logo. We just had a T-shirt. I think we also have, yes, a coffee mug with the iOS logo. And anything else there?
This is a more
Oh,
simpler.
that's all right. The T-shirt with a smaller logo, more discreet. So we'll be launching that. Watch out for an announcement in your inbox. And we're actually very pleased with the way they look. I mean, Amy has been the first guinea pig to receive these, and she got we got a thumbs up, also apparently from her colleagues at the office. Okay, I think that's all for me. But back to you, Amy. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Roderick. Great. Well, I'm excited to kick off the first presentation. So we'll hear from John Knapp on, yeah, oak conservation research in the islands of California and Baja. So John, feel free to share your screen and we'll field questions after John's presentation. So, John?
Can you all see that?
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Thank you to the International Oak Society and the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak to have invited me to share about what's happening with the oaks on the islands. There's a lot of new developments, a lot of great work happening, and so I'll be presenting both on some of work that I've played a role in and then work that others are doing. And so there's been a lot of folks that have contributed to this talk. Uh, I work for the Catalina Island Conservancy. I'm their senior conservation scientist. And I've been there for a little over a year, but I've worked for them in the past. And so I'm in my ninth year with them right now. And I've had the opportunity to work on many of the islands of the Channel Islands and engage with the islands down in Mexico, which as a whole are part of the overall California archipelago. So before we really dive in, I had to start a slide with one of my botanical heroes, and this is Edward Lee Green. He was a botanist who did a lot of collection throughout the American Southwest and especially on the Channel Islands. And he had a quote when he was working on San Miguel. San Miguel does not have oaks. We don't know if it had oaks, uh, but he talked about it being a wasteland in the 1880s. And that was shortly, about 40 years after there were sheep and donkeys and horses that were on the island that basically just ate everything off that island. And so when he was out there collecting, he just noted how bad it already was by the 1880s. And that's important for the story that I'm going to share. Uh, When the Nature Conservancy took ownership of 90% of Santa Cruz Island in 1978, this is what Santa Cruz Island looked like. I mean, this looks like a war zone. You can't see a plant in sight. I mean, it is bad. We could go down to Guadalupe, which is at the southern end of the archipelago. In 1945, when Reed Moran was out collecting, he noticed this slope that had Pinus radiata. It's an endemic pine to Guadalupe Island. Mixed in there are tomentillos. And you could see how much it had degraded because of introduced goats till 2003 when this photo was taken. Goats were removed in 2007. And so that story has changed, but it gives you a sense of just we don't really know what these islands were like, uh, uh, or either pre-European contact or even post-European contact. We could head north to Santa Rosa Island. This is Quercus tomentilla, and you can see how much soil is lost. These red lines show you where the soil surface should be, and what you're looking at are stilted oaks that are about 1.5 meters above the ground due to all the soil loss. And so there's pretty much a rainbow of different kinds of introduced vertebrates that have severely impacted these islands. The primary species that did the most damage were sheep. that were introduced for grazing and for wool during the 1800s. Uh, Many of those became feral. Goats were introduced early on as food sources on these islands, and then feral pigs. And in the case of Catalina and Santa Rosa Island, introduced mule deer. But there's a whole suite of species that have had impacts, and you think, house mouse, rats, how are they an issue? Well, young oaks are quite tasty, especially endemic oaks to some of these small mammals. And so this is, again, what it looked like across these islands with the sheep in particular. We have a lot of great documentation of the amount of sheep, and there was nearly one sheep per acre on many of these islands. So we're talking over 40,000, 50,000 sheep at one time. And then when you layer that with all the other introduced animals, it's death by 1,000 cuts. This here is Santa Cruz. You can see the sheep and just how devoid of any vegetation. It's hard to think that oaks would be able to not only survive but thrive in these conditions. Quercus pacifica on Catalina Island on the left is browsed. Many of the oaks have a severe browse line from a century and a half of over browsing by a suite of animals. Or on Santa Cruz, this Quercus tomentilla that you can see a sheep trying to just reach for that one leaf that it can get access to because it's browsed everything else. But it wasn't just the sheep or the goats or the deer, it was also feral pigs that ate the acorns, rooted the soil, added to that soil loss that we've seen on many of the islands. But it wasn't just introduced animals, it was humans who had extractive practices. Uh, One issue that doesn't get a lot of attention in this role of loss of biodiversity on the islands is just fuel woods. There was a lot of whaling going on in California in the 17 and 1800s, and you can see by all these barrels that's just whale oil, and it took a lot of fuel to render whales down to their oil. And same with pinnipeds. A lot of sealing was done on the island, so much so that the northern elephant seal, uh, sea lions, stellar sea lions, all have were basically killed for their blubber and then rendered down into oil. And it took a lot of fuel woods to do that. So we don't really know what the extent of the oaks were on the islands because of all these extractive uses that were happening. So the California archipelago uh, includes the Channel Islands, which are north of the Mexican border, but there's a suite of other islands, 16 in total, down to Isla Natividad to the south in Mexico. And as a whole, uh, many ways that you can kind of slice it, be it archaeologically, uh, biologically, with plants, with seabirds. They share a lot of things in common. Many of the same geologic processes, weather and climate has affects this whole archipelago. And these are the islands that have oaks. So the smaller islands, the islands with sandier soil, like San Miguel and San Nicolas, uh, we don't know them to ever had oaks, uh, but maybe they did, and those oaks were removed through those both extractive practices or introduced vertebrates. So we have 10 oak taxa that we know of, and these are the species that we believe were on the islands based on physical botanical collections and what we know from specimens in herbaria. Some of the oaks we're not sure. they closely resemble morphologically other species, and so we're not quite sure if they existed or not based on those herbarium specimens. Uh, but there's been some recent genomic work that has helped narrow that down. But 10 on the island. So these offshore islands have a high diversity of oak taxa. That's something to note that we'll get into later in the talk. So this paper by Elena Mead through the SORC lab at UC Los Angeles really dove into Quercus chrysalopus and Quercus tomentilla. And then this recent paper by Ryan Buck and Victoria Sork's lab looked at hybridization of oaks. And so much of what we know of the oaks is because of these two papers. So I have the URLs here. So if you wanted to read them, you could dig in. But this is the most recent genetic work that's happened on the oaks of the California Islands. And so from that, we've realized we actually have a different picture than what we thought we had. So let's look at Quercus chrysalopus. It is not known on Santa Rosa, even though there's a herbarium specimen. Of the oaks that we sampled, there was no sign of Quercus chrysalopus that the Sork lab looked at. No pure chrysalopus on Santa Cruz or Anacapa, but it does pop up on Catalina, which it wasn't known from. And there is no pure on Clemente either. Blue oak, Quercus douglasii, it was known from a few specimens on Catalina. None could be detected through the genetic work. On Santa Cruz, there were no pure individuals either, but I have a little asterisk there that we'll get into in a little bit. Same with Quercus engelmannii. This is an endemic oak to Southern California. There were several specimens that were recorded by Dr. Thorne of California Botanic Garden, formerly Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. We could not find any pure, but we did find hybrids. And same thing on Santa Rosa. Again, there were records from that island, but herbarium specimens, but the genetic work did not find that any of those were still present or not even hybrids. Quercus cologii, there are hybrids, but no pure individuals. In lobata, there was question if there was pure lobata. Edward Lee Green documented several lobata on the island, and most were thought to be Quercus macdonaldi. But come to find out, of the oaks that we sampled, there were pure Quercus lobata, but none on Rosa. And Quercus parvula, variety parvula, is only known from Santa Cruz and the mainland, but there is some genetic work out of UC Berkeley that points to possibly Quercus parvula is restricted just to Santa Cruz Island. And then Quercus pacifica, the island scrub oak. This is the champion of the islands when it comes to oaks. And there was no new information there, but there's a lot of questions that hybrid paper indicated with Quercus pacifica. In Tomentilla, Sork's lab found that there was some interesting results on Guadalupe, that it was kind of this outlier. Clemente and Catalina have no pure Quercus tomentilla. They are all hybrids. But Anacapa, Cruz, and Rosa have pure tomentilla. So the story really changed once that genetic analysis was done. And so we have 6 more oak taxa. They're hybrids. We have Agrifolia and Parvula. It's a hybrid that's known. That work was done up by UC Berkeley. Same with Agrifolia and Kalagii. We were able to document that Kalagii, the X chasei, is present on the island. That was rediscovered. We thought that was lost. Uh, we found a number of Quercus pacifica and Douglasii. It's an unnamed hybrid, but that was confirmed, as well as Engelmann, and another unnamed hybrid with Pacifica. So Pacifica is making a lot of friends, it seems like, amongst all the oaks on the islands. Um, Quercus pacifica and lobata. This is a known hybrid as McDonaldi, and this has been known for a while, and that was confirmed. And that also there are quite a few Quercus tomentilla and Chrysolipus on several of the islands. So in total, we have 16 oak taxa across the archipelago, which is very impressive. And these are the islands that they're found on. This hadn't really changed, but it did eliminate some uh, oak taxa from some islands. For example, the number three, the Pacifica de Glaciae, that only occurs on Cruz and does not occur on Catalina, and nor does the Engelmannii hybrid occur on Santa Rosa, which it was documented in the past. So 16 oak taxa. Uh, why is that? Well, this is a map of the Channel Islands and the Southern California coastal shoreline to show when sea level levels were lower, uh, just how close the islands were to the shoreline. And some of the islands, like the Northern Channel Islands, formed one large island called Santa Rosa. And so you could imagine it was much easier for oaks to have been washed down, or acorns washed down out to the islands through the various river systems that are in Southern California, or a bird like a jay or something like that, maybe flying over. That's possible for for some of these islands, but something like San Clemente is much further offshore, even when sea level was lower. Uh, there's a lot of archaeological work that's happening across the Channel Islands, and uh, the Channel Islands play a very key role in what's called the Kelp Highway hypothesis, also known as the coastal migration theory, that the Americas were populated more by folks using the coastal resources, using small watercraft, than coming down through the land bridge in the Bering Strait. That supposedly still is one avenue for peoples to get to the Americas, but that the rapid spread of people makes more it's a little bit more logical that they got so far so fast, given that they used watercraft. And islands like Santa Rosa, which was the Northern Channel Islands, there were no bears, no mountain lions, no rattlesnakes, nothing to harm you. It must have just been a paradise. And so these hybrids, and through the work of Ryan Buck and Elena Mead and Victoria Sork, uh, their research indicates that humans may have played a large role in why we have such a high diversity of oak taxa on these islands. In these oaks, they're foundational species, and they provide just key habitat for a variety of wildlife. Uh, This island scrub jay on the right is only found on Santa Cruz Island. It was found on other islands. The island fox is climbing up a Quercus pacifica log here, photographed with a camera trap. Uh, bunch of wildlife are utilizing these oak resources. And with climate change, it's uncertain how all these species are gonna fare. Um, Even land snails, when you look at the number of endemic of species that have gone extinct on in the world, a large number of those were on islands, and a large number of those ones that were on islands were land snails. And this species of land snail, Trilobopsis, it is still unnamed, uh, but it is found in island scrub oak woodland on Santa Cruz Island. These oaks, this habitat, these communities, uh, basically harvest the fog. The islands are heavily influenced by maritime climate. And the fog, as you can see, rolling over a hill, that's a hill over to the right on this slide, is just being bathed by fog, and the oaks are just combing that moisture out of the air and transporting it into the soil. And you can see the fog moving in here with Quercus tomentilla, Quercus pacifica. They're just combing that that moisture out and transporting it into the soil. And you can imagine, as those oaks in those earlier pictures I showed you, how they're browsed up by all those animals. The fog just kind of moves through rather than is captured by these canopies that touch the ground. So even these oaks still have a signature of browse on them. And most of the oaks, especially in these kind of cloud forests, are just covered in mosses and lichen, as seen by this photo on the right of Tomentilla. We're back at Santa Rosa Island. This is Quercus tomentilla, and you can see how that browse line, you can see on that oak on the far right in the background, how the fog just kind of moves through underneath it. And there are some mosses on the ground, but for the most part, there isn't that transfer of water from the air down into the system. And these systems have been drying out. The main, like as I said earlier, the main kind of, I would call it the workhorse of the islands when it comes to oaks, really is Quercus pacifica. And this here is on Santa Cruz Island. Pacifica occurs on Catalina, Santa Cruz, and Santa Rosa Islands. It has two forms. There's a tree form that can be roughly uh, uh, about 20 feet tall. And then there's also a low form that's roughly about knee high. And you can see the amount of erosion that has occurred. And if it wasn't for these oaks, how much more erosion we would have. If you were to hike down those drainages, it would be like you were walking through spaghetti, because there are so many roots going across those drainages that are still connected. But those oaks are providing a lot of habitat, and a lot of endangered plant species are found within these low thickets of island scrub oak. Island woodland is another is composed primarily of island scrub oak. Oh, sorry, island oak, Quercus tomentilla, and it's usually associated with ironwoods and Catalina cherry on the islands. Those three species together form these island woodlands. On some of the northern islands, there's bishop pine that is a component. But again, you can see the two people in the back here. They're looking for land snails within these tomentilla groves, and just how foggy these systems can be. But when they're not in the fog, they are on steep slopes. That's where they're able to survive the over browsing by all the introduced vertebrates. They're clonal, and they form these fairy rings like redwoods do. And there are some islands where you can stand in the middle of a grove that's many trunks, but it's a single individual. Um, but it usually they're in very inaccessible areas. And this is the tallest tree across uh, the California Islands. This is a tree that was on Guadalupe. It's Quercus tomentilla that you can see just by this person here. This is Dr. Scott Morrison of the Nature Conservancy. This tree is buffeted by wind day in and day out from prevailing north winds. But then when Mexico gets hurricanes, which are becoming more frequent with climate change, the oaks are then the wind comes from the opposite direction, and so they're weaker when they get a southern wind, especially if it's a strong wind. And this tree, you could probably have fit about 4 or 5 humans standing inside the trunk if you were to hollow out that trunk. I've never seen a Quercus tomentilla this large before. Um, the photo doesn't do it justice for how large it is, but you can see along the base all the mosses that cover this. And when you're uh, on a nice foggy day, it is just raining inside these Quercus tomentilla grows. It's very impressive. So I just want to acknowledge a suite of people that are kind of champions or individual champions that are leading the charge on protecting these oaks. And um, so many different groups here. I could name a whole bunch more, a lot of people for the last 20, 30 years that have been engaged in protecting these places. Some with the intention of protecting oaks, but others just protecting the entire system. And so I just want to acknowledge them here. And these are many of them. This is out on San Clemente Island, where botanists are getting together annually to meet to address not only oak issues, but other botanical resources. And so let's go back to Santa Cruz Island. This gives you a sense of that protection, just protecting a place and removing these animals. On the left, sheep were removed 10 years prior, and you can see the amount of vegetative recovery that's happened while sheep were still present on the right in this photograph. That just gives you a sense of, you can see some of these oaks barely hanging on the right of this image. And this was taken back in the late 1980s. More photographs of Santa Cruz Island, but you can see 1972 on the upper portion. These are two different photo monitoring points, aerial photo monitoring points. And on the bottom happened, 40 some years later in 2017, and you can see the amount of recovery that happens once these animals are removed. So some of the work that's happening on the islands with regard to the oaks on Catalina, we're the last of the California islands that has a large herbivore, and that's invasive mule deer that we're active. We just started uh, a 5-year project to remove them 2 weeks ago. But we're also tackling invasive plants as many of the other islands are. On Santa Rosa Island, USGS and the National Park Service and the California Institute for Environmental Studies are trying to uh, establish vegetation around these island oak stands. There's not many of them on Santa Rosa, and they're trying to reestablish soil building properties and have other plant species that will harness that fog to give these oaks a chance the seedlings can take root. And they use in this lower left-hand corner, there's a photo of a little screen, and that is, they call them fog hats, but it's basically just a cloth mesh to capture the fog so that those plants that they plant along the wall there is watered by the fog. So they're trying to harness the processes of nature to help restore these oak ecosystems. And on Santa Rosa, they're again trying to increase the leaf litter, get those nutrients back in the soil, look at the invertebrates and the microbes. There's a whole bunch of studies that are going along with this project so that it can be scaled up to uh, improve the other grows on the island. On Santa Cruz, there's a lot of old agricultural lands that the Nature Conservancy and the National Park Service are working together to um, to establish oak woodlands in again. On Guadalupe, they're trying to reestablish their cloud forests. So they on Guadalupe Island, they only have Santa Quercus tomentilla, and so they're working on that species. There's only 24 mature trees that are left on that island, and so the folks over at Hesse are just planting. Uh, those endemic pines as well as an endemic cedar that's out there as well. Uh, on Catalina, we are the only location that has a permanent town on one of the islands, and and so we're growing Quercus tomentilla so people can plant those in their yard. So we're having kind of ex situ collections within the island, within people's homes, because people are going to bring out plants. There's no kind of biosecurity rules when it comes to that. So people bring out all kinds of plants. And so Kevin Allison, our native plant manager, is trying to provide stock so people will use what's on the island rather than importing non-native species. And there's work being done with the San Diego Zoo and Kevin Allison at the Conservancy using micropropagation or tissue culture to grow these oaks. And we're looking at other ways of conserving oaks through propagation through air layering with our partners at the San Diego Zoo, creating more diversity within ex situ collections. And thank you to Amy and the folks at the Morton Arboretum for really driving that. And then also cryopreservation of the embryos that the zoo has been experimenting with so that we have a backup in case we have something like a large fire that just happened on Santa Rosa Island, that we actually have oak stock uh, in hand if needed, if there was a catastrophic uh, uh, situation that happened like what happened on Santa Rosa Island. We're continuing to survey and map for these rare oak taxa, these hybrids. This here is the blue oak that was found on or rediscovered on Santa Cruz Island. And so there's just a lot of different ways that we're trying to chip at the conservation of oaks and to make sure that there is a future for this community. And I have to say, Victoria Sork has been very instrumental in looking at the adaptation of the genetics of these oaks. And that has given us other ways of thinking about how we might conserve the oaks instead of just conserving what we have in hand. We could maybe move same species, but from different islands to islands where maybe they're not as well adapted, but they're adapted to future climate scenarios on other islands. And so, uh, with that and different propagation methods, that's giving it's a brighter future for these oaks. But the islands are recovering fast, as you can see from those photographs that I shared, the monitoring photos. Just these islands are very resilient, and we just want to make sure that they're going to be resilient into the future. So with that, I'll end there, and thank you for to letting me share this with you.
Wonderful. Wonderful presentation, John. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We'll open it up for a few minutes for questions, so feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I'll start if no one else has a question for now. John, that was great. Thanks very much. I've had the privilege of visiting Catalina when during the IOS tour of California, and really enjoyed that trip. And I've often wondered since then, do you think it's feasible at all to organize a trip to see all the islands? Has anyone tried to do that? I mean, what is a transport between islands like?
Oh, it's since the United States went from the Department of Defense to the Department of War, I think it would be hard to access some of those military islands,
Mm,
like San Clemente Island. Uh, there are people, including myself, that have been to all those islands. There's 16 if you count the Fairlawns up off of San Francisco. Uh, then, there's 17. But it's possible, but there are some Nat Geo trips that go to a lot of the Channel Islands, and some of you might know Sula Vanderplank. She's
mm,
organized some trips down to some of the Baja Islands. That's how I was able to get to those islands, like Cedros to see Quercus cedrosensis in situ on island. It's also occurs on the mainland, of course, but yeah, it is possible, but not easy.
okay.
Hi, John. I have a question. Great presentation. I live in San Luis Obispo County. Um,
All right. I'm
one,
down the road from you in Lompoc.
yeah, not far. One is what are there going to be any kind of native grazers on the islands? Are they trying to reintroduce species to take that niche in the ecosystem? And two, what's your take on ex situ planting of some of these species off island, say in Lompoc or further
Mhm.
up the coast of the mainland, with some of the more dire climate change projections?
Uh, Great questions. I'll tackle the first one first. I should have made that clear in the presentation, and I realized I didn't. But there are, other than Isla Cedros, there are no native grazers on any of these islands. So other than invertebrates, mice, but mice eat a lot of seed. There were no native herbivores on the island. Um, Post-Pleistocene. There were like small pygmy mammoths on many of the northern islands. The vegetation was very different during that time, of course, but so there's no plans to introduce any herbivores because there just wasn't any. And that's why many of them have lost their defenses, both chemical and structural defenses to herbivory, because uh, why invest in those structures and compounds if you don't really need them? And then in terms of ex situ, I know Quercus tomentilla is being planted quite extensively throughout California as like a street tree or landscaping up at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I know it's being planted up there. Most of those acorns are being harvested actually in Aurora Grande at a school, what I've been told. And so there's not a lot of diversity in those collections. And so one thing that Christy Powell and Amy Byrne and myself and others have talked about is, do we need to introduce, do we need to there's more tomentil on the mainland now than there ever was in the past. It's a Miocene relic, so it used to occur on the mainland, and now it just occurs on the California Islands. And maybe there's a need because people like that tree so much to take some of those acorns and get stock that's more diverse. So there is a lot more diversity ex situ. Uh, I would say at one time I used to be very much a purist, but I found working with some of the rare plant species on the islands like Berberis pinnata and Solaris, where there at one time was only five known. Uh, Two of the five were in botanic gardens. And if it wasn't for those two botanic gardens, California Botanic Garden, Santa Barbara, uh, we wouldn't have had those. But since then, we refound several new occurrences and populations that were lost in time. So I am a I would say a strong supporter of ex situ collections, and um, but I think we have to be strategic in how we go about it and uh, reintroducing some of those species back to the island. There's biosecurity issues. So that's where working with folks like the San Diego Zoo with the cryopreservation becomes really important, where you can introduce something or the tissue culture that are relatively sterile. So you're not introducing something like Phytophthora.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question then. So you said they're not investing in defensive compounds. Does that mean that all the acorns are sweet, or is that just wishful thinking?
That's a good. I've wondered that, from some of the tucks I've seen, like in Spain, I guess, where there's oaks that are both hybridized and have been cultivated. They've lost a lot of those tannins, and I haven't tried to make anything with the acorns out there. Yeah, that's a good one. You're giving me some ideas here, Jesse. So,
I'll follow up with you with an email. Thanks very
all
much.
right, thank you.
Great. Thanks for these questions. There was one more question in the chat, but John, if it's okay with you, if you don't mind just answering Tim's question in the chat, I think we'll move on now to
Sounds
Michael's
good.
presentation. But thank you
Thank
so
you,
much again,
everyone.
John. Yeah, wonderful presentation. Always learn a lot from you, so thank you. All right, so now we're going to transition to Michael Eason, who will be talking about oaks of Edwards Plateau in Texas. So, Michael, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Thank you, Amy.
Mhm.
How does that look for everyone?
Looks great. Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. I'll get started. Thank you for having me come and speak at this webinar. I think this came up several months ago. And for those of you who do not know me, I'm Michael Eason. I head the conservation department here at San Antonio Botanical Garden. And am also heavily involved with the International Oak Society, serve on their board, and have been participating in the outreach committee for several years now. I think ever since the conference in Las Cruces. So today we have kind of a weird two-parter. I want to talk about the oaks of the Edwards Plateau and a bit of the culture that surrounds oaks here in Texas. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Edwards Plateau, it is generally an area in central Texas. It's often called the sort of the Texas Hill Country. So if you drive through any small town and you are driving north or into the Hill Country, oftentimes there are signs that say Gateway to the Hill Country, but every town says that. It's generally much drier in the west. Average rainfall is about 13 inches, and then we get about 30 towards the eastern portion where it joins the Blackland Prairie. So Austin is sort of like the easternmost sort of range of the Edwards Plateau here in Texas. It's fairly good size, about 20 million acres. We have well over 100 endemic species, about 1,900 total taxa. That might actually be a little bit higher. Artesian springs, flowing rivers, spring-fed rivers, all that sort of good stuff. And if you drive through anywhere in Central Texas, really the major oak or the major vegetation component you're going to see, especially on the uplands, are these oak juniper woodlands or savannas, depending on sort of the land management practice of whatever that ranch decided to do. Some people like to clear juniper, some like to leave it, and so sometimes you end up with mostly oak. Sometimes it's the mix of juniper and oak, but the oak juniper component is really quite large. So the geology, it is limestone from all the way from the west all the way to the east. There's a small pocket of granite up in the north around Llano, Mason counties. And that's where you'll find our famous sort of enchanted rock, this rather large rock igneous formation that's has been exposed. It is now a state natural area. The area is really cut with canyons throughout, especially in that southwestern portion of the Edwards Plateau. That's where things get really quite deep and shaded, and we have lots of endemics down there. And then within these canyons, this is where you'll find things like chinkapin oaks, relic populations of big-tooth maple, cypress-lined rivers and streams, orchids, ferns. And when you get out of those canyons, that's where things become more arid. So the Edwards Plateau itself is interesting because it is sort of the joining of several ecoregions. So the central area of Texas, we have the short grass prairie and tall grass prairie coming in from the north. You have the Chihuahuan Desert coming in from the west. I'd mentioned earlier, we have the Blackland Prairie, which sort of flanks it on the east side. And then we have the Tamaulipan thorn scrub or the South Texas Plains that come up from the south. And with all of those other ecoregions coming together here in the hill country, we have a huge mix of plants that happen, lots of hybridization. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of endemics that have occurred here in Central Texas over the years, millennia. But oaks. We have a fair selection of oaks found in Central Texas. We have probably one of our most famous is the Hill Country live oak. This Quercus fusiformis has gone through some name changes, but that's what we're sticking with these days. Red oaks are not super common out here, but the most common one is Quercus bucklei. It's most common in the sort of eastern side where it's a little bit wetter and cooler. As you get towards the southwest, it sort of dies out. I think the last or the sole Quercus bucklei I've been able to find is in sort of this western Edwards County, which is almost to the edge of Valverde County, reaching sort of the Rio Grande. At that point, it switches and it becomes more Chihuahuan Desert. But we did have like I said, we have a good handful of white oaks that we have throughout, and we're going to highlight some of those here in the next few slides. By far, my favorite and my first one that we're going to talk about is the lacy oak. It's Quercus lacei. It has numerous common names: Texas blue oak, Canyon oak, rock oak, which I've highlighted that just because you're going to see that for many oaks that we have here in Texas. Smoky oak, but most people just call it the lacy oak. It has this sort of this beautiful blue-green foliage. Sometimes from a distance, it looks like this sort of smoky gray that you can easily pick out along the hillsides. It's pretty common in the uplands, and you don't really see it down in the riparian areas or the deeper canyons. Its range is from basically Central Texas, Kerrville area, Central Texas, Edwards Plateau, and then it crosses down into Mexico and the Quijilo and Nuevo Leon. There are two forms. We have sort of this entire leaf form, which is, in my experience, a little bit rare in the wild. And then we have this lobe form, which is the more common form that you see throughout. And they can be side by side in the field. And in some cases, some of the oaks will have their outward leaves will be this entirely form, and then some of the younger leaves or the interior leaves will be more lobed. So it's not all pure per each tree. It's gone through some name changes. It was first first name Quercus lacei, first named in 1901. And if you can read that, that bottom paragraph, the original specimens were collected on Lacey's Ranch near Kerrville, Texas. The Lacey Ranch pops up quite frequently in this presentation. In 1924, it was reduced to a form of Quercus brevilova, and then in 1992, it regained its status and became a true species. Interestingly enough, it was often called or combined with Quercus glaucoides, which is located further south in Mexico. But if you look at the plant of the week in December 30th, 2006, they're still going by Quercus glaucoides. So there's a lot of old nursery folks that I speak to landscapers and growers that still call it glaucoides. A next one, and I put this in because somebody asked what a shin oak was, so we need to make sure we can clear that up. It's Quercus sinuata variety breviloba. Again, it's somewhat common in areas, typically on the uplands, the upper plateau. You don't really see that in this one in the lower canyons. The larger form of Quercus sinuata is found in central Texas. It's not as common as this one is, but it's a much larger, typically a single trunk tree. This one is multi-trunk, typically forms these thickets, these shinneries, which is, since somebody asked in one of the posts online, this basically comes from the French word for oak, which then was from the Cajun or Louisiana French word for chinnery. So that's where that term came from. This one, it's typically found, or less common in southern Oklahoma, but it stretches through central Texas, and then you can also find it in northern Mexico. Personally, I think this one would make a really great landscape tree with that small stature. I think it'd be really great in parking lots and apartment complexes, things like that. The Quercus muhlenbergii. This is our chinkapin oak, which is really a widespread species in the United States. Very common in the eastern U.S., here in Texas and further west. The only places you really are going to find it will be in canyons, these mesic canyons, and along sort of riparian areas. The leaf morphology can vary. It's insanely between canyons. When you get out there, you start looking. Some of these can be really quite thin. I've seen oaks with leaves 1.5 inches in diameter and 6 inches long, versus in some that look more like the typical more eastern forms of the leaves. But typically, lots of lobing. And one of the larger trees you're going to find here in central Texas. It in the past has gone by Quercus braei, and it's also been a variety of braei. And if you can pick it out again in that bottom paragraph, there's the original collections were collected on the Lacey Ranch near Kerrville. So Howard Lacey apparently was busy trying to figure out which sort of oaks he had. Also known as rock oak. We're going to move on to a few of the red oaks. By far, I think I mentioned this, the most common one is Quercus bucklei. It goes by buckley oak. I've heard Spanish oak, Texas red oak, and of course, rock oak. There you go again. It is found from Texas or southern Oklahoma through Texas. It may occur in the barely into northern Mexico, in northern Mexico and Coahuila. I've been on ranches down there and have seen what looks like Quercus bucklei, but that actually may be the Quercus gravesii that occurs on limestone, which is also found there in Valverde County, just adjacent to the river. This one is that one that gives us all the good fall color. Like I mentioned, it does change in density. It can be one of the co-dominants in areas in the eastern portion of the Edwards Plateau, but as you get to the southwest, it really drops out and becomes rare in some of those canyons. And the leaf morphology on this can very widely throughout its range here, just from county to county. This one was taken in Kerr County. The previous one was taken in Junction, Kimball County, which they're adjacent to each other. I've seen plants, and I was trying to find my photographs, but I could not. In Blanco County, you have trees that have these leaves that are half the typical size of these other oaks. It has had some confusion in the past. It again, the old nursery folks and some of the landscapers still refer to this as Quercus texana, which, as I think most of us know, that was applied to a species that was found in the eastern part of the state. And this was named in 85 after Buckley, who did a lot of work on the oaks back in the day. Another one, less common, typically you find this one up on ridgetops, plateaus, is the Quercus marylandica variety Ashii. This is a smaller version of the one that's found further east. This one stretches from Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and here into Texas. Typically found in small thickets, again, like more of an upland species. And then we get into our lone live oak. So the live oak section. This is Quercus fusiformis. This is sort of our iconic Central Texas live oak. Any bluebonnet photo you see as this one, you will have a live oak in it for scale. Somehow, I may argue that people were actually taking photos of the live oak, and the bluebonnets were there just to brighten up the picture a little bit. It has gone by several names in the past: Quercus fusiformis, or Virginiana variety fusiformis, and Quercus virginianum subspecies fusiformis. And still, some people just consider this part of the Virginiana group. This individual here, most of the ones you do see are going to be, especially in the areas of good drainage and good soil, they're going to be single trunked. But oftentimes you come across areas like this. This is more on the upper plateau towards the western edge of the range, where you begin to see these mottes that are formed, these clonal groupings of plants that this is an area that's heavily browsed, just like what we saw on Catalina Island. But these oaks typically don't get much larger than 20 feet when they're in this situation. And again, this is probably just this very, very thin limestone soils. Very little rainfall or stunted growth, but a very common component of the western portion of the uplands of the plateau. And so that was a quick overview of our selection of our oaks here in Texas. And so that's sort of that taxonomy, the botany side. But there's another part of our culture here that really loves oaks. And I'll have to state that some of this may not be true. There's a bit of conjecture going on. So, part 2, the Texas oak culture, and we will get right into this. So, as with any culture, we have a reverence of oaks here in Texas. Historically, we had many meetings. In fact, I just learned this just recently, that the revolution of Texas started under an oak, maybe. When the Mexican army wanted their cannon back and they came to claim that in Gonzales, Texas, there was what was called the Gonzales Scrape. And that was when Sam Houston, who was a leader of the Republic of Texas, that's, well, prior to the Republic of Texas, but he was in Gonzales, and they ran away from Gonzales, and they basically burned it to the ground. So the Mexican army would not have access to any of the things there whenever they showed up. And they met under this oak. It's about 12 miles east of Gonzales, Texas, and it's still standing, and you can still go see it. You can barely see at the bottom, it says the Sam Houston Oak. And that was in 1836. Many treaties were signed underneath our oaks. There's an oral tradition, we're not exactly sure if this is true, that Stephen F. Austin and the Native Americans signed a treaty outside of Austin. At the time, it was known as Waterloo. The Native Americans did use that grove of trees that's currently where treaty oak is in Austin, and they call that the Council of Trees. So the Native Americans definitely met under these oaks. Many weddings were had. There's a wedding oak in San Saba, Texas. This was an oak that was sacred to the Native Americans. They believed it had magical powers, and if you got married or joined under this one particular oak, that you would have a bountiful life and a happy marriage. The Europeans continued that tradition, but it's not all joy. There's also a bit of judgment that happens under these oaks. And in 1862, this is the Bandera hanging tree. 8 wandering Texans were caught by some Confederate soldiers. They thought that they were abandoning their duties, and so 7 of them were hanged, and the 8th one begged for a bullet. And so they were all killed under this tree, and there's a little grave site there for them. They're all buried in a mass grave. Later on, it came out that they were probably just robbed. So these oaks served as courthouses, and many of the courthouses that we have were built around oak trees. One of the famous courthouses is the down in Columbus, Texas, called the Columbus Oak. It has long since died, the oak, but the root or the stump is still standing there. But that's where they carried out frontier justice in 1837 when Texas was a republic before it became a state. So that's our oak history. But I propose we actually have a religion in here in oaks. So it's the oak, the smoke, and the sacrament. So each year, and this little presentation was brought to you by an article that was passed to me, which I really found quite shocking. 60,000 cords of oak are burned or sacrificed each year in Texas. That's about 10,000 oak trees, estimated around 250 million pounds. And this is where the ritual and the religion comes in, because the oak trees are selected, they're cut to a certain size, they're stacked, they're allowed to air dry, and they're seasoned for a full year before they are burned. And in this burning, it's interesting because when I started thinking about this, it's often carried out by the male members of our society. The flesh that was carefully selected is set ablaze by these specially selected sacred logs. This process can take hours, often beginning in the pre-dawn hours, and often in solitude. And it allows that pitmaster or the person who is actually grilling or smoking to be alone and at one with the wood that he is smoking. And over the course of hours, if not days, the essence of the oak joins this flesh, and it is estimated some of these fires, there's one barbecue place in Lockhart that has had their fire burning for well over a century. When all that is done, there is the communion. Texans gather to eat brisket. I call it the summer of gluttony. It's from the 4th of July through Labor Day, where millions of pounds of briskets are consumed. And after Labor Day, the days shorten, the weather gets cooler, and the backyard fires diminish. So this is the season of contemplation and reflection. And eventually the days get shorter and shorter, and darkness comes in. And then we decide to adorn all of our oak trees with light, illuminating the way forward and embracing the endurance of the oak. We remember our sacred oaks and all the oaks that were lost during the feasting of the season. Neighbors compete to prove their devotion and lessen their guilt, and pilgrims will travel around the state to look at the lights that other Texans have put up. And then again, there's the rebirth in the spring, where the solar cycle continues. And if you think this is odd, the more that you do sort of look at what we have here in Texas around this tradition, we have our own sacred water. Some people just call it oak smoke flavor concentrate. We have a Bible that's all about this. We have people that will stand in line for hours upon hours just to eat barbecue from a certain pitmaster. our courthouses are often planted with oaks. And of course, we have the communion, the atonement, and the rebirth. And so every religion demands a sacrifice, and here in Texas, the offering is that oak. Thank you, and I will be open to questions because I'm sure there are many.
Yeah. Thanks so much,
I
Michael.
feel I have to apologize.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Questions? Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat.
I'll start the questions if you like, Michael. That was a great presentation. I'm glad it was muted because I was in stitches of laughter for most of the end. That was very good. I'm very glad you enjoyed the you covered the culture of oaks because that's very much, I think, something International Oak Society is about. We're not just about the taxonomy and the botany, but just all the culture that surrounds it. One question for you, which I think I just don't know enough, and I'm confused about. So, does Quercus virginiana not grow at all on the Edwards Plateau? And is it found further west? I thought it was.
Um, I've talked to Adam Black about this. He's the expert. He's the one that always reads the oaks of North America during the time of mourning. Um, I had always learned way back when that the Virginiana basically stopped at the Edwards Plateau. But apparently there's been some research lately that that's not the case. It is definitely more of a coastal species and doesn't make it this far north. That said, it is widely planted throughout Texas. It's a faster growing oak in the nursery trade. A lot of people like to grow that one versus the hill country Fusiformis. So it's been widely planted, and I have talked to it sort of extensively with Adam about this because apparently some of the old descriptors, the characters that one would use to identify Virginiana or Fusiformis in the wild don't really ring true, and so he has indicated that it's really the Fusiformis that is stretching through the Edwards Plateau and continuing south. So when you get into further south in Texas, even on the sand sheets down in southern Texas, those are all Fusiformis and not Virginiana or any of the Mexican species that might make it up. Oleoides, I believe. So
Okay, and if you come across it in Arizona, then it's cultivated, or
yeah,
okay,
yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's not that far west.
yeah,
So
yeah. Thanks.
yeah, the westernmost ones I have seen here in Texas would be in sort of southeastern Brewster County. And there's a small pocket of them there, but they really begin to die off. It's poor choice of words, but they become much less common as you go further west, and really it's Valverde County, and that's kind of mostly the stopping point. And then at that point, it's truly just in canyons where they get enough water.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Just a quick question in the chat, and then I'll get to you, John. Has there been an iOS tour around the Edwards Plateau? Yeah. That's a yes, Roderick, right?
Yes, I don't know if Michael wants to add. Were you on that? Yeah, you were on that, Michael. We didn't
Yeah.
have a tour as such, but we did do a what we call Texas Oak Open Days, where we visited. We were in Houston for John Ferry Garden, Austin, and San Antonio. So and then we had a field trip through. I think that was through Edwards Plateau, right, Michael?
Right. We went and we visited some big trees, and then we tried to do too much in one day.
Okay,
But we saw some of the Chickapin oaks and the Lacey's, and yeah, we did a quick sort of a 1 day trip through there. It was a kind of a marathon day.
it sounds like following this will be high demand. You'd better design an itinerary and propose a tour, Michael.
Well, if there is some places in Kirk County where I'm seeing some what appear to be lacy stellata hybrids. I've
Huh.
never seen anything like that. I've shown the photos to Adam, and that's what he's agreeing with. But it's some really bizarre oaks. They don't follow the typical leaf morphology that I see of the entire leafed oak or the lobed lacies. They're really bizarre.
Mm. Yeah, there's interest of a potential another one in the next 5 years. So what people are wondering. So yeah, high demand. All right, John, go ahead.
I think the question you should have asked, Amy, has there been communion? So, so
Right.
great talk, Michael. I loved it. Like Roderick, I was laughing as well. Uh, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts of is the sacrifice outpacing the rebirth, or is that kind of keeping pace? I wonder.
We're humans. We don't plan ahead. Those pesky oaks are just in the way of more grazeland for cattle. There was an article that came out a few years ago, and that's kind of what triggered this idea. It was someone passed it along to me, and it was about a gentleman, someone that sort of found his niche in making money here in Texas, and that was supplying oak wood to the barbecue restaurants here in Central Texas. And it was just an insane amount of wood. I just could not believe that somebody or a business could be providing that much wood per year. And how sustainable is that? And, there's a lot of oak wood out there, or a lot of oak trees, but eventually, eventually we're going to look like Catalina Island or Santa Rosa.
Great. Thank you for the question. Matthew in the chat had a question on Edwards Plateau. Are there areas where oaks are growing too thick due to fire suppression? He had recently heard the historical function of some oak savannas has become compromised, but wasn't sure where this is pressing.
Um, No, I mean, I wouldn't say that there are areas where the oaks are too thick. It's probably more so the juniper. And then there are areas, and I really should get some photos of this, centered around a little town called Warren, Texas. That's where I first started seeing this many years ago, and it was sort of like the epicenter of this oak wilt outbreak. And then a few years ago, I took this county road through Warren south to I-10, and it was apocalyptic. 90% plus of the oaks were dead. And just skeletons standing in these pastures. So oak wilt is definitely spreading, but that is probably more so a result, and this is conjecture on my part, more so a result of the lack of fire to sort of keep the dead wood out, and then seal up those wounds and do all the things that fire is supposed to do. So it's more so like I said, more so the juniper encroachment that's happened over the years, right? And other shrubs. So
Okay, thank you. Just two quick questions. Are there any kind of state laws in Texas that protect the champion oaks?
it's funny you should mention that. Yes, there is. Who is that?
Hugo?
Okay, so there are laws that can protect them within sort of certain municipalities. If you have a tree on your property, you are the owner of that tree. You can do whatever you want with it. So if you lived in an area that did not have any regulation, you can just cut down a giant 500-year-old tree if you wanted to. In cities and townships, or like Travis County, for instance, they have passed ordinance. So anything that's above, I think, 15-inch diameter, maybe 10-inch diameter, is classified as a heritage tree, heritage oak. And so you need permits if you're going to do anything, and there's strict fines if you cut those down. Now, I will also propose that in our oak religion or cult, that there are people that are trying to get rid of this belief, and they are getting actively trying to get these cities to relinquish these and get rid of their regulations and ordinances when it comes to that. And one of them is Governor Greg Evans. So apparently that was a big deal when his campaign for a while because he couldn't cut down a tree that was on his property in Austin. So because of regulations, that if you live in a city, there's regulations. If you don't, there's not.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. And then final question, how is the oak wilt progressing in the hill country?
I think I touched on that a little bit, but yeah, there are areas where it's spreading quickly and this is 20 years of driving the same roads back and forth between Austin and West Texas, just seeing it progress from again that little township called the Warren, and it's just been slowly moving out. That's sort of just outside of Fredericksburg. It's one of the spots where I've seen it. So,
Okay, I think that's it for questions. I think we need to. Oh, was there one in the chat? Is Edwards
Yeah.
Plateau the same as hill country?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Everest Plateau, Hill Country, they're interchangeable. So,
Okay. Great. Well, thanks so much, Michael, for your presentation, and thanks everyone for your questions, and thanks again, John, as well for your presentation. Really appreciate all of your time and work to share this with everyone. And thanks for all of you for joining and participating and for your support of this work. Any final thoughts, Roderick, before we wrap up?
I'd also like to join you in thanking our presenters, and especially I'd like to thank Amy Byrne for hosting this webinar. Thank you, Amy. It's been great. You always do a great job in getting us going and handling the questions. Just before, I did say there'd be an opportunity if anyone wants to raise a question or say anything about the IOS in general, about our events. This is the time to do it. No, I don't see it. So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you, Amy. Back to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. We'll share the recording very soon. I hope you have a great
Yep.
rest of your day, afternoon, or evening, and take care. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.